we look at what we had last season, and we had two competitive spring football leagues. We had the
Mhm.
USFL and we had the XFL.
Yeah.
Now, what was interesting was they were both not making a lot of money because you couldn't decide, hey, okay, well, I'm going to watch the XFL because The Rock owns it, or I'm going to watch USFL because of this and this. Now, MJ and I actually got the opportunity to go out and speak to a lot of people, coaches and whatnot, and film those games. I ended up talking to like the head athletic trainer for the New Orleans Breakers, which was really cool. I was asking him how he got this job. He was a part of the NFL team before, and he wanted to be the head of something, and that's where he went. But looking back at it and a brief history of what we've known as the UFL now with the XFL and USFL merger, Vince McMahon had the XFL back in 2001. And this is just a brief history for everybody that doesn't know it. And it was like extreme football. It was literally people were spearing each other like WWE and football pads. It was crazy. It was literally just extreme football. Well, that ended up being a wash. Like, okay, dude, all these people getting hurt, whatever. We're just gonna wash it out. Now, back in 2017, what's really interesting is Vince McMahon said, "Hey, I want to come up with a United Football League." And
Mhm.
so it's interesting because he actually acquired this name, never trademarked it, and just said, "Hey, this is going to be an idea. It's going to be a thought bubble in there." Okay, so XFL relaunches in 2020. Doesn't go well because COVID messes it up. COVID messed up everything, and so it just goes away. Well, The Rock and his ex-wife are business partners. They end up buying the XFL, and now the USFL is coming into fruition. So now we have two spring seasons of football, which we do not know what to watch. So to get rid of all the confusion, The Rock was like, "Hey, why don't we just merge and we both make money?" So now we have the UFL, the United Football League, and we have two divisions. There's only 8 teams. I would like to say 5 came from the XFL and 3 came from the USFL, which is really the case. 5 names, but we have an XFL division. We have a USFL division, which is 4 teams coming from the XFL, 4 teams coming from the USFL. So we have the Birmingham Stallions in the USFL bracket, the Michigan Panthers, the Memphis Showboats, and then the Houston Roughnecks. And what's interesting about the Houston Roughnecks is this was an XFL team, but the Houston team in the USFL was the Houston Gamblers. Well, I guess they like the Roughnecks a lot better, but they still attribute that as the USFL Houston Gamblers, even though there was an XFL Houston Roughnecks team. It's almost like a you know how the Browns still have like the Baltimore Browns, and it doesn't go to the
Yeah.
Ravens. It's that kind of thing. So the Browns keep the Baltimore history, but they're all in Cleveland now. Well, the Roughnecks, even though they didn't change location, they're still in Houston. They keep the gambler history, the Houston Gamblers, over the Houston Roughnecks in the XFL. So those are your USFL division teams, and your XFL division teams are the St. Louis Battlehawks, San Antonio Brahmas, your DC Defenders, and your Arlington Renegades. And I've watched a couple games, and it is some fun football. Now, you have people, they don't kick on the 35-yard line. They kick on the 20-yard line, which is so interesting. And you see people, it's rare that they get a touchback, but sometimes people will kick that ball freaking 70, 80 yards and get a touchback, and it's so interesting to see. And atop the UFL right now, we have the Birmingham Stallions at 3-0, which is who we went and saw back in Birmingham, and it was really fun. It was a fun time. It's like football never left. I mean, you sit down and watch college, and you watch NFL, and you're like, okay, well, there is a distinction there. There is obviously, I'm watching pro football and I am watching amateur football, if that's what you want to call it in college. But in the USFL, it was a different feel. It was like, I want to say I'm watching pro football and I want to say I'm watching amateur football, but it is somewhere in the middle there. And there's no distinction because there are people that are like NFL caliber players, and there's people that are just like, okay, well, I played in college. I want to go to the next level, but the NFL, I just can't make it there. And so to watch that and to see these players grow was very, very cool. And I saw a kicker kick 5 field goals in a game. in a USFL game. And I was like, man, you don't see that in the NFL. You don't see somebody kicking 5 field goals. So it's interesting. Um, a couple NFL players to note back in the UFL and who was in the USFL and XFL. We have AJ McCarron, who was an Alabama quarterback. He played, I can't remember the years, probably from like '08 to 2011, somewhere around there. And he was actually on the receiving end of what I like to call the greatest moment in college football history. Nate, do you know what that is?
National championship.
No, 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 no. He wasn't in the national championship this year. I'm talking about the kick six,
Kick
Nate.
six.
That's what I'm talking about. The
Kick
kick
six.
six is what I like to call the greatest moment in college football history. Even though it happened in the Iron Bowl, and
Wait,
I'm not.
so you gonna say that's the greatest moment over
That's what
Vince
I.
over
That's what
Vince
I
Young?
like. What's
Oh,
up?
over Vince Young and over Devontae Smith
Well,
game
We
touchdown.
we can say like, hey, okay, Vince Young in the national championship game against USC was probably well, not probably, is the greatest college football game of all time, right? We can say that, but it was so consistent across that game and in both games actually, the Iron Bowl as well that year. It was so consistent. Nobody had been able to tie and even beat Bama in those last couple years, and Auburn was somehow able to tie and not only tie, they walked it off with a missed field goal, received it, and ran it 109 yards to the house to walk off and win the football game against Alabama Crimson Tide.
But that's what happens though in rivalry games. Rivalry games it's different than a regular season game. Rivalry games, conference championship games, it's completely different because it's like I don't like you, and it's like people play with a little bit more because again at that time Alabama was on this high horse.
Oh yeah,
Beating Bama and their prime and in their heyday, and when Bama was Bama, beating Nick Saban, that may have saved the coach from losing his job. That's how it was. Like again, and this is me talking to guys that have played in prestigious schools and whatnot. I remember one of my teammates, Jake Long, had told me something in regards to beating Ohio State from Michigan. He's like, man, you can lose every game that year, but if you beat Michigan or beat Ohio State, it's a good season. And at that time, Bama was Bama. Anybody knocking off Bama, yeah.
it was. I mean, this was before NIL and all that stuff, and you can say,
Yeah,
oh,
this is
Nick
when
Saban
football was
retired because
pure.
of NIL because
Look,
he
this is
couldn't play the game anymore like he used to, where he could just give players this, that, and the other. Bama was atop
this is
everybody.
when football was based on the talent. Like seriously, and this is when you had some of the best games.
Oh, I love it. Rivalry weekend is probably the
It's the best
most. It's
best.
the best football to watch, in my opinion. It's better than NFL, better than
No,
anything.
again,
It's the best football to watch.
I played with guys that have played college ball at rival teams. I remember like vividly. I played with Chad Henne and Jake Long, Michigan alumni, for 3 years. Brian Hartline, Ohio State. We were rookies together. We came in, our lockers were right next to each other. When I say, and these were three offensive players, a quarterback, offensive lineman, and a receiver. When I say almost like literally arguing with each other over Ohio State, Michigan, leading up to the game.
Ah,
Same thing with guys that played at, some guys that played at Auburn. Ronnie Brown played with Ronnie Brown and Carlos Dansby, and some guys that went to Bama, and it was just like, it was like, oh, y'all really about to fight, right? Wait a minute, hold on, y'all about to fight. Like, there's
it,
no, I love being a former NFL player and being a former collegiate athlete. I love it. There is no atmosphere like a college atmosphere when it comes to rivalry week. There is no atmosphere.
when people sit here and tell me like, "Oh, NFL is better than college," I look at them and it makes me wonder. Like, you really and to say this is kind of putting them down, but you really don't know football.
No, you
You
don't.
really don't know if you're gonna sit here and maybe now you can make the argument because of NIL. But back then, you're going to sit here
No,
and tell me NFL? No. College
it,
football
it
was and arguably still is the most competitive sport out there.
one game that I always enjoy watching, and this was in the early 2000s. Well, no, 2000s was at the height of it. Pittsburgh versus Baltimore Ravens. Troy Polamalu, Ike Taylor, Ryan Clark, James Harrison on defense, Ray Lewis, Ed Reed, Terrell Suggs on the Baltimore defense, Big Ben on offense, Hines Ward, Mr. Crackback himself, Joe Flacco. That was the closest thing because it was a heated rivalry. It had it was about the win and the loss. It was about winning the game. It was so much about bragging rights though. It was so again, same thing about the rivalry week. It's I don't like you. And guess what? I get the gloat over the next 12 months until we play again that we beat you. And you playing for Arizona, we played for the Territorial Cup. My pride, it was my pride and joy to knock off Arizona State at their home. It was my pride and joy. Oh man.